We are back, and I bet you're glad to see us. It's Gareth and my good friend Maria Machado. We are back for another episode of How Do You Solve a Problem with Maria and Gareth. Maria, how are you doing today? Everything going well?
Very good, and you?
Yeah, it's not bad, not bad. Everything is great. The new year has begun. We're into like week 3 or week 2, I forget exactly. And we're going to start talking about writing papers, because when we talk to researchers, this is one of the number one issues that they have, like overcomplicating, making the article writing process just way too difficult. Wouldn't you say? That's something that we encounter all the time.
True.
True. So in our presentation today, and if you're listening to this on LinkedIn, of course, you can put comments into the LinkedIn comment box. Those will appear for us as chat comments. If you're listening back to this event sometime in the future, how are you doing? We hope this will be helpful as we build a roadmap for article writing and publishing. And we've got 7, or is it 8, tips for you coming up a little bit later in our presentation today. But a roadmap for writing a paper is really important, right, Maria, as a starting point for putting an academic article together.
Yes, preparation is key. You have to really know what you want to convey so that you can build up your text towards it.
So preparing, selling yourself, structure, and effective writing are all topics that we do cover in our SciTrain workshops. So do have a look at scitrain.com if you'd like to learn more about what we do. But let's talk about getting going, Maria. And this is not even one of the tips. This is just a starting point, identifying what your article is all about, Maria.
But as I was saying, you have to really know what you want to convey. So what you want to get across is summed in these 3 questions, which is why it's important to the research that you did, what were your aims, what you're planning to achieve, and then the answer to your question. But although this is quite straightforward, a lot of the people forget one or the next. I see a lot of people finishing their paper and writing the conclusion, not providing an answer.
So before you begin, do have a think about these 3 questions. What is your research question? What are your aims? And what's the conclusion of the study? And you put these together, you start to think about what you're going to write. You've got your research done. Most important to begin as you think about the structure of your writing. And I love this slide because I think academic writing is just like writing any other kind of story, really. Readers need a structure. Wouldn't you agree, Maria, as you go through that academic article?
Yes, you need to follow a train of thought. You need to follow logical progression. You need to know what was the context and what was already known in the field. Your question arose from, where the people are, what do they need to know, what are their information needs, and what do you need to do to fill the gap, and then where are they going in the future? What are the implications of what you did?
We're going to give you some simple templates and some simple structures for putting your article together in a moment in our event today. But do have a think before you start to write. You've done your research. You've collected all the data. You've tested that really important research question. You've got all of that information together. What's the structure going to look like? What's the question that you're answering? And how you're going to talk about that in your article as you put the piece of writing together. And a really good tip for doing this is to find another article recently published in one of your target journals that does all of that as well. And then you can copy the structure. You can look at the shape of that particular article. And we're going to talk our way through in our top tips today the different sections of academic article writing, but you wouldn't necessarily write your academic paper in that sequence, would you, Maria? That's not the way it often goes with researchers.
No, it's much better to start writing from a pool of writing you've already done. And what's the writing that most people have already done? They've written protocols of how they've done the things that the experiments that they've done. And then you can start to think about how to present the results of the experiments that you've imagine that you've presented graphs or figures at a conference. You'll need to add more data, subtract some things, present it in a different way. So it's better to start from the middle to the end and then come back to the beginning, because it's in the beginning, the last possible thing should be the title and abstract, because it's what encapsulates the whole paper. So you can only write them really after you've written the whole paper, and what you need to write with some sense of marketing yourself in mind the most, because it's what's going to be out there in databases and what most people are going to read.
This is like a beginning tip for writing. We're going to come on to our top tips in a moment, but this is a great start to think about what you've got written already. As you begin your paper, you're thinking about your structure. You've got that target journal in mind. You've got that article from your target journal that looks like the paper that you want to write. In your particular case, you're starting to think about what you're going to do. You're thinking about the structure. You've answered those 3 questions that we talked about on an earlier slide. Then come the different sections of your article, as we're going to talk about, or rather as Maria's going to talk about, because I'm doing enough talking already in this presentation. Why is it that an academic article, Maria, tends to have this kind of shape to it?
Because you need to go from general to specific, and then from specific to general again. So you need to inform people why you did the study that you did, and you need to base that why on real world needs, because there's no point in studying something that's really, why you can't see the importance of it. So you need to start out with why is it important to study, then what you did, how you did the experiments that you did, what you found, and then in the end, what it all means again. Come back to the beginning and answer your question, what it all means to the greater field.
We're aiming for academic papers that go into journals with decent impact factors. So we want lots of people to read our papers, which means that we have to broaden them out and make them as interesting as possible. And these 4 questions that you can see on this slide are really, really important to answer before you start the writing process. Why did you do the study? What did you do? What did you find? And what does it all mean? What did you conclude? We're going to come back to those in a moment, as you'll see in a little bit. But we're going to begin now with our 7, or is it 8? 7 or 8? 8 or 7 top tips for writing an effective academic article. So let's begin with tip number 1. Maria, the title, which you might not write first, but what goes into an effective academic article title?
So this is what is going to appear first whenever people are searching for what you did and for the subject. So you have to identify the main issue of the paper. So begin with the subject. Don't cram your title with abbreviations that nobody's going to know about. You have to be unambiguous and complete, but you also have to attract readers. So get something to entice their attention. Get something to whet their appetite for reading more, and keep it as short as you possibly can. You need to be able to know how you look for papers, so that you know what people are looking for in the papers. When you have a title that's 43 or whatever it is words long, maybe you get a bit too tired at the end. It may be that it's important to have all of those, but keep it as short as you possibly can.
Did you know that titles that are shorter actually get higher citations? Less than 7 words is considered to be ideal if you want to maximize your citations. This is very, very important. So our top tip number 1 is to think about effective, alluring titles for your research papers. And of course, if you'd like to learn more, we have entire workshops on how to put together academic articles. The title, we could talk about it for hours and hours and hours. Don't forget to have a look at scitrain.com if you'd like to learn more. But what about top tip Number 2, Maria, that's the abstract. What have we got to say about writing an effective abstract for an academic article?
So a lot of the time, people will write the abstract first because it's easy to kind of have a roadmap of what you're going to do. And then at the very end, when they've finished writing their paper, they don't go back to the abstract. So a lot of the time, the abstract doesn't really represent their study. You always have to make sure that what you say in the abstract correctly represents what you did, that you say that you answer those questions in sequence, that you have a structure that people can follow, and that you keep it as jargon free as possible. Once again, no references, no weird abbreviations that other people slightly outside of your field won't know. And it has to be a standalone reference. It has to be concise. You can't reference in your abstract figures that you're going to show somewhere later in the paper because people won't have access to it sometimes. So it has to be able to stand alone. Gareth!
You should imagine that you're always writing a conference abstract when putting an abstract together. This is all that people are potentially going to read. The abstract and the title often are all that people read of your academic work. And there's those 4 questions that we saw before on the old egg timer a little bit earlier on in this presentation. Abstracts need to answer in sequence 4 questions. And this is a great tip for putting together an effective abstract, right, Maria? Those 4 questions that your abstract must answer in sequence.
Yes, because that is the way that people are going to perceive. So the most important thing, which is what's the implication of all of this to the greater field, has to be at the very end, has to conclude, so that it is the message that people take away if ever they don't read anything else. So it's the last thing that stays on their minds. So be very, very careful of how you finish your abstract.
And people ask us how to do an abstract. This is our top tip. And that's why it's one of our top tips for article writing today. Answering these 4 questions, writing them down, and then answering them with information from your own study is a great way to get 100 or 150 words together in sequence, in structure for your next academic article abstract. Absolutely fantastic. We've done the first 2. So hopefully tip number 3, it's not going to take much guesswork for everybody to figure out what it's about. It's about SEO. What does that even stand for, Maria?
Blah, blah, optimized search engine, blah, blah, things to do with the internet that I don't like. So whenever you write a paper, you need to define what your subject is. And within that subject, there are specific terms that occur again and again and again. For instance, in medicine, you have a dictionary called MESH, which is the one that really tells you what are the accepted terms and abbreviations for specific pathologies, conditions, the genetic diseases, all of those things. So you need to make sure that the way that you describe what you did, even some methodologies, are in accordance with that dictionary, because it's going to impact where your article ranks in search engines related to those keywords. So keywords, identify the keywords, be intelligent where you use them, and not only in the title and the abstract, but also make sure that they appear in scattered throughout your paper. Not just put something here and there because it looks right, but because it's what you've done. Be very mindful of headings and subheadings whenever you're describing your article, because that's what you will pick up to write in your title and your abstract.
A lot of people don't bother with this, and I can tell you that I never used to bother with this myself when I was writing academic articles. But actually, this is how people find your work. So having written an effective title that's short, having put some time and energy into crafting a 200 or 250 word abstract that follows the sequence of the 4 questions that we've just talked about, you then need to look for good keywords. And as Maria mentioned, if you're a health science, medical sciences researcher, the MESH database is a great place to start. But other subject areas, psychology, engineering, have their own keyword databases as well. You can put in your title, upload your abstract, type in a few sentences. You'll get back some suitable keywords that you can then use in the keyword section when you come to make your submission. Don't use the same keywords in the title and in the keyword section, because that is a waste of keywords. But this is how those pesky little bots on the internet, those search engine optimized thingy-mabobs, will find your paper, and that's going to increase your citations. It's really, really important. So tip number 4, what's this one going to be about? I wonder. It's about the introduction. We're building out the shape of the paper, and this is the top of the egg timer, right, Maria? The introduction to your paper.
So even in the introduction, you have to start out from the general to what you're going to do. So imagine that you're talking about the importance of a molecule in diagnosing a disease that is very prevalent in whatever population. You have to start out with what is known in that population. Why is that disease prevalent? And then how do you identify it? And how can you better that identification? What are some diagnostic techniques that have come out in recent years that weren't available before? Something like that. But you will need to follow a structure to explain why it is that you did the study that you did and why it's important to shout it out to the world.
I usually base this section on articles that you might see in high impact factor journals like Nature, for example. You'll see this structure in many, many, many STM journals, this 3-paragraph or 3-section based structure to the introduction. It doesn't have to be 3 paragraphs, but there will be 3 distinct sections to a well-written introduction. And the first part is the broad bit. Why is this study of big importance? Don't start with the nitty-gritty with the molecules, because nobody's going to read the paper apart from the 5 or 6 other people that really care about those particular molecules. Why should the readers of Nature, Science be interested in this? That's the broad bit. Then, of course, you've got to give some information specific to your study, and then you've got a bridge between the introduction and what comes next. And if you look at Nature papers, you'll see that phrase exactly as written here. This study shows, or here we show, it bridges into that fantastic next section of the paper, our top tip number 5. I moved too quick, Maria. Sorry.
There are some journals that really don't enable you to do this study shows that in the introduction. At the very end, they don't want you to say anything of what you did, of how you did what you did, or what you showed in the study in the introduction. But they will want you to clearly write an objective, a hypothesis that you'll then test. So you'll need to think about those questions in the very beginning and how you can formulate them as a hypothesis to be tested.
Fantastic. And then top tip number 5, my favorite section of the paper, because lots of people think this is the boring bit, but actually it's the methods, my favorite part of article writing. It's very specific though, isn't it, Maria? But there's a template that we can give people for writing this section as well.
So materials and methods are the core of the paper. They tell other people what you did and how you did it and how they can do it themselves if they wish, and if they have access to same patient group, the same materials, all of that. So there's a couple of things that you need to be aware of. There are several things in the method that you need to comply with. There's ethics, whenever you need ethical approval to conduct your study. There's study design, which is really important to to get other people on board on the level of evidence that your study provides. And then there are methodological details that you need to describe so that people can assess your results and can compare them with their own. So the balance between too little and too much detail is the difference between what you can do and what you can get away with.
This is the bit of paper writing in review, as Maria will tell you. This is where people usually have problems with papers when they get them to peer review, right, Maria?
Yeah.
So if you are writing your method section, think about it like a timeline and show it to other people in your department, other researchers, before you make that submission.
Because once again, this is the bit that people usually begin with whenever they're starting to write a paper. So at the very end, sometimes they realize that they needed details or did not need details that they just written in the materials. So be sure to always go back and check if what you have written in the materials and methods matches the results that you provided.
We get lots of questions about method sections. We've got whole workshops on this. Do check out scitrain.com. People ask us, for example, how much information should I put into the methods? Do I need to explain all of the different techniques and approaches that I use? Well, you're just going to have to sign up for one of our other webinars to find out the answer. Because right now we must move on in this event on LinkedIn, and we're getting some comments. Fantastic. Thank you for those comments. Questions are always welcome. It's top tip number 6. And this one's about the results. Right, Maria? The results section, often also one of the earliest parts of a paper that people will put together.
Yes. So, and with good intention, because those are the things that you can present preliminary results in conferences that you need to discuss with your peers to have some idea of where to go next, what's the next logical experiment to do, if you need further replicates, and all of those things. So it's an evolving, ever-changing section. It's not static. It evolves with time, and it may tell you different things at different times. But you have to order it around what your objectives were and how you're presenting it in tables and figures, because you have to cite usually figures and tables in order they appear. So use the tables and figures. Don't repeat what's in the tables and figures in the text, because that's really annoying. And state what you found. And don't wax lyrical about why it's important, because you'll have a place to do that later.
Exactly. This is the section for just the facts. And a great tip is to make figures, which you probably have done already, as Maria said, for a conference presentation, for a poster, and base your results section around figures. You've got your outcomes, you know, your sequence of events from the methods section. Usually the results and methods have the same kind of shape to them, sometimes even the same subheadings in the methods section as in the results section, but base it around figures. That's a great tip. And again, whole workshops, entire webinars on just these exact topics. If you'd like to learn more, you'd better go on over to scitrain.com. Top tip number 7, it's the discussion. Now we're at that pyramid the right way up section of our egg timer, the discussion section. Maria?
There is a couple of ways to go about it. So that is to restate what you wanted to find and then answer your question, or relate your study to what has already been found and discuss it within the context of other studies. But you always have to say how your findings relate to other publications in the field. What were the strengths and weaknesses of your study? What were the limitations of your study? How did you go about mitigating those limitations? And keep your conclusions to an appropriate amount of enthusiasm, because a lot of people tend to overstate their findings and say that I've cured this disease. No. You found something that will probably be able to do this in the future.
Too much egg in the pudding, as we say in English. You can't overstate your conclusions. You can't go too far. I'd start off by answering the question at the beginning of the discussion, few sentences that tell the reader what the answer is to the question, the hypothesis that you're testing, and then broaden it out, make it relevant, make it interesting, make it important, relate it back to all of those things that you talked about in the introduction, as Maria was saying. But don't finish your paper with a sentence like, more work will be needed if we are to ever answer this question, or the cliche at the end, more research will be needed. That's a terrible way to finish a paper, right, Maria?
Yes. So you do need to have future prospects, but if you do think about future prospects, and if you are being then talk about them. Say that, oh, I've done this study in a model that doesn't completely replicate, so we'll need to find a different model, or we'll need to study a different population, or we'll need to find different methodologies to do this. But do have specific pinpoints and suggestions for what could be done in future. Usually it's good when you say something that will enable you to address the limitations that you've identified within your study.
And cite yourself then. You see, if you talk about what you're going to do next in the paper that you're writing, you do two things. You protect yourself from getting scooped by somebody else who might read your paper and think, oh, that's a great idea. They've got to cite you if you talk about your future work in your own paper, and also anticipate what might come up in peer review. As Maria was saying, the strengths of your study, but also the weaknesses are important to discuss, because those may be mentioned by peer reviewers. If you talk about them, then your peer reviewers can't. So I don't know if that was 8 tips or whether that was 7 tips. I think that there's probably 20,000 tips in this presentation. But anyway, in conclusion, when thinking about writing an academic paper, have a look at sidetrain.com, but also think about this checklist. The bottom line here is that you will get your work published if, Maria, if
you address the importance of your research question, if you use the appropriate methodology to answer your question, and if you write effectively. That means not writing beautifully, but effectively to present a clear message and have a take home that people can undoubtedly get away. So keep your audience in mind and do relate what you're writing to them. And always think that you'll have people evaluating your work that will be reviewers, and they will probably know a lot from that subject area, but maybe not as much as you in that specific niche.
Managing peer review after you've made a submission is an entirely different topic of the publication process. We have done LinkedIn Live events on exactly that topic in our series, How Do You Solve a Problem with Maria and Gareth? So do check out those. If you have a scroll down the LinkedIn feed here, you'll find lots of free videos and other kinds of content. You will get your work published. It's important to pick an important question, of course. Use the right method to address that question, and then write the work up, target the work with a clear, effective structure, following the 7 or 8 or 20 tips that we've talked about in our event today, and following the standard IMRAD egg timer shape for academic article structures. Maria, any final thoughts, any final comments?
Always be very, very mindful of the references that you pick, because those will support your conclusions, those will shape your discussion, and also tell other people your paper will be read in conjunction with the rest of the literature in the field most of the time. So be sure that you associate yourself with good things.
Fantastic. Thank you, Maria, for joining us on our LinkedIn Live today. It's always great to do these events with you. Thank you, everybody else, for joining us. If you're listening to this in the future, which sounds a bit strange, you can always get in touch with us at any time, ask us any questions, sign up for our free events, or get in touch with us at sidetrain.com to learn about how we can help your institution, your research group, your team be more effective at writing and publishing. Maria, have a great day. See you soon.
See you soon.